Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Christian Meissner. Christian is a professor of psychology at Iowa State University, where he also runs the Applied Cognition Lab. At the lab, he and his team conduct and publish an avalanche of research with partners from the law enforcement, military, intelligence communities, and beyond. Of all the topics they conduct research on, they have a particular focus often for interview and interrogation, credibility assessments, applied memory, legal decision-making, and other related topics. Their foundational research has provided a ton of actionable information, techniques, and ideas that don't just apply to our very best investigative interviewers. They also apply to all of our high-impact personal and business conversations as well. And Christian is going to do a tremendous job illustrating all of this as he packs several hours of information into one short conversation. So of all the topics we're going to talk about, of which there are plenty, we're going to start by talking about recognizing the difference between credibility and knowledgeability when we're having a conversation with somebody. He's also going to talk about how important it is to understand somebody's placement and access within the context of whatever it is we're having a conversation about. And speaking of context, he's definitely going to dive into how critical it is to have an accurate understanding of the context anytime we're involved in a high impact conversation. He's also going to talk about some of the more valuable nonverbal and verbal cues we can listen for, and he's going to teach us how we can ask stronger questions. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm super thankful for Christian for being so open and so dedicated to sharing all of his research, and I'm really excited to sharing it with all of you this week. Thank you so much for being here for another episode. We truly appreciate it. While you're here, please just take a quick second to like the show, share it with your network, subscribe to the show, certainly give us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. And while you're online today, please take out just a couple of quick minutes to check out our sponsors as well. You can head over to humantel.com, explore their catalog, read their research, and then choose the best online training program for you to begin developing the skill set to understand when people's emotions are shifting by accurately evaluating changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. While you're there, you can enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice. For the professional interviewers who are listening, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can learn everything you need to know and get all your questions answered for how to join and contribute to the International Association of Interviewers and how to qualify for and earn your Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. That's all at certifiedinterviewer.com. And please head over to inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs that our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more to teach them the skills, techniques, and perspectives necessary for uncovering hidden value in all of their high-impact conversations. Once again, we appreciate you being here for another great show this week. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you Christian Meissner. Chris, it is so great to see you again. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is my pleasure. Anybody who has spent any time having a conversation with me about communication knows how hard it can be for me to keep my geek on any kind of reasonable leash. And so with all of the research you've done and all of the different angles you have and the depth of expertise you've developed, I'm now excited to lose the leash and take this conversation in as many different directions as we can. So as we were talking a little bit off camera when I was getting ready for the episode and was looking through your research to try to pick a way to have a conversation, I think we could probably do 50 different podcast episodes based on all the different research you've been a part of.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
It's true, for sure. But I think someplace I'd like to start with the hour or so that we have today is with this concept of assessing credibility. Because whether somebody is an investigative interviewer, whether they're interviewing job candidates, whether they're in sales and they're trying to figure out if this is real or negotiation, is this a legitimate deal, or even from a leadership standpoint, I'm trying to assess the credibility of a progress update or something that I'm getting. This is a theme that runs across the board, regardless of what people's roles are and where they find themselves in what industry. So with that rambling preamble, if we could open up here, I would love to start by asking you, with your expertise, what are some of the most important considerations we should be making anytime we assess someone's credibility?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think you're right. Everybody is interested in this question. Everybody's looking for the most diagnostic, the most accurate ways forward. The thing we often think about when we talk about credibility is the use of deception, right? A strategic approach to concealing information or creating information that might be otherwise believable. And I think well, I don't think, I know that there's decades of research on deception and deception detection in that context. And I'm gonna put a pin in that. And we're gonna come back to that research for a moment. But for a moment, I'd like to talk about the other elements of credibility, because credibility is all about assessing knowledgeability, right? Someone's knowledge and the accuracy of that knowledge. So in the intelligence world, we often talk about placement and access. Does an individual have the appropriate access to information, and are they well placed so that they would have had the relevant experience or knowledge, right, to share? I think too often in the deception context, we don't consider the role of placement and access and someone's what we might call knowledgeability in that context. But it's really important to consider the context within which someone should have the knowledge that you're seeking, right? The other side of that is the deception side of it. Now, what we've learned over the years can be boiled down to a few things. Number one, we often talk about cues to deception. And I think, decades of practice suggests that it's fidgeting, it's nervousness, it's those kind of classic signs that would lead to deception. But it turns out there is no Pinocchio's nose when it comes to these cues to deception. And in fact, these nonverbal cues are often not as diagnostic or valuable as you think. In fact, the problem with anxiety-based models is that the situation can create the anxiety, right? Someone who wants to offer you the truth and wants to provide the information, but understands that they're being evaluated and maybe they're being questioned in ways that are questioning their credibility, are going to show the very same signs of nervousness and anxiety that someone who is being deceptive and strategic on that part. So what I would encourage listeners to do is to put aside those nonverbal cues. And if you really want to assess credibility and knowledgeability, then you have to ask questions that allow you to elicit the relevant knowledge that can be assessed with information that you have from external sources. In the law enforcement world, we might call it evidence, right? We're looking for statements that might be consistent or inconsistent with the evidence that we have. And that all starts with the way that we question and the way that we elicit information. Too often, and I know you've had guests on that have talked about confirmation bias, too often that biased belief that someone is being deceptive or that someone is being strategically avoiding the response to informations guides the very questions and approach that we have. But in fact, let's get back to the best cues to deception. The very best cues to assessing credibility or deception is how people tell their stories. The words that they use, the information they provide, the details that they can provide are the key to assessing credibility. And asking questions that allow for the elicitation of those cues, those verbal or what we call story-based cues, is pivotal. And, it goes back really kind of to the heart of your podcast, which is you got to be willing to listen. And you got to be willing to ask questions that allow for that information to come out so that you can verify it.
Thank you for maybe the most impactful opening 3 minutes of any podcast I've done. That was fantastic. How you crammed all of that into one quick answer was amazing. So many valuable things there. And to try to work backwards a little bit, especially for people that might not come from that investigative background. Dave Thompson and I just recorded a couple conversations together, and I know you're friends with Dave. And one of the things that Dave said was, if you want to know if someone's lying, let them talk more.
Yep. Let them talk.
All too often, people jump to the conclusions that somebody is lying based on these anxiety-based myths that you just talked about. And Dave hammered those to death the last time he and I talked. But then we start making judgments, and then the judgment leaks out through our behavior. And now you have somebody in front of you who's experiencing fear of disbelief, not fear of detection. And now we're in this cycle of, oh, look, they're really lying to me. No, they're just convinced you're not believing them, and they're trying super hard to tell the truth.
That's right.
All super, super important. The value of context is extremely important. But I love right away how you sidestep the deception detection to come back to placement and access. All too often, and again, in any scenario, there's something happened in the warehouse, not an investigation, but something broke. There was an accident,
critical incident,
whatever.
Yeah.
Well, let's go figure out what happened. Well, who had the placement and access? Like, who legitimately could have seen something, heard something, knows something?
That's right.
In sales, all the time, there's an issue with the client. Okay, cool. Well, was it the salesperson? Was it the account manager? Was it the tech? Who was involved that would have the placement and access, not just to the issue, but to your point, diagnostically valuable information somewhere in the relationship that can give us insider evidence we didn't have before. And when people shift that mindset from, I'm going to catch you lying to me, to I'm going to collect as much valuable intelligence as possible to make the best decision, rainbows come out of the clouds and life just changes.
You got it. When we train investigators these days to assess credibility, I have two objectives. One is to lower their confidence in their judgment of deception, right? Because this is a really hard task. And the second is to increase their curiosity in the story, right? It's all about digging deeper and exposing the narrative that allows you to determine a person's areas of knowledgeability and the extent to which they might align with information that you already have, right? You mentioned the hiring context, and I can imagine an individual who is putting on a show about what they know and offering information in that context. Asking questions like, are you familiar with Power BI? Are you familiar with and have you used certain analytic techniques, for example, may not be sufficient to expose their knowledgeability. And all too often, I think we see that hiring can go awry. We hire people who actually lack the skills necessary for the job that we were actually hiring for. And it all goes back to the interview, the elicitation of those knowledgeability and exposure of the skills.
Amen. And I think you just gave a tremendous example that resonates across industries, especially when hiring. Interviewers ask questions with implied expected answers.
Yeah.
And when I know what the right answer to the test is, don't get mad at me when I give it to you. Like, you made it obvious. That's what you want. I want the job. So I gave you what you want. Now hire me. So I'm supposed to say I'm familiar with Power BI, which this might be embarrassing. This is the first I've ever heard of it, to be honest with you. But so now if that's the angle you're going, instead ask somebody, what have been the most helpful shortcuts you've created within Power BI? What are the three biggest challenges you faced as you were learning to use Power BI? What's the most valuable information Power BI has unlocked for you? Now, within 1 second, you're going to know if they're familiar with it or not.
That's right. And I think it goes, I've seen some great examples these days of where hiring managers and entities are now asking candidates to perform tasks that are relevant, right? It's very difficult to conceal your knowledgeability and your ability in those contexts. So I think those are the very kinds of questions, asking people to do things and to express their knowledge in ways that really expose the limits of what they know and what they don't know.
That's a great way to put it. Allow them to expose the limits. And it's not accusatory. It's not judgmental. You
No,
used the word
no.
curious earlier. Just let them show you. Maybe they've got an incredible depth of knowledge. All right, awesome. Maybe they
Yeah,
don't, but there's only
yeah,
one way to find out. When it comes to getting this type of information from people, finding out their accessibility, their knowledgeability, their placement, I feel like a lot of this runs very parallel to helping people access and share their memories.
yeah,
Maybe it's investigation related, a witness, a victim, maybe even a suspect, depending on our approach.
yeah.
It's certainly for job interviews. It could absolutely work for leadership conversations as well. I believe you've done a lot of research in this area too. So if we are trying to make it easier for people to access and share truthful memories, how should we be going about it?
It's a great question. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's just start with a basic understanding of how memory works. There are really kind of two systems that we might access when we access our memories. One is our associative or semantic networks. So our memories tend to be associated with one another. As I think of one thing, I may then think of other things. That could be along timelines. It could be along the meaning of words or concepts or experiences. So if I think about last Christmas, that might lead me to think about other Christmases, right? And other things that I've done, or maybe about New Year's, because Christmas is followed by New Year's and events. Sometimes you're not busy for Christmas, but you're busy for New Year's. Those kind of semantic associations live in our experiences, our autobiographical memory. At the same time, we have, as humans, something rather unique. We have the ability to mentally time travel, to put ourselves back into situations. And as we experience things in the world, we encode context. So if I think back to this interview with you, Michael, I might think about the topics that we talked about, and I might associate it, given the nature of your podcast, what topics we probably talked about or did talk about. But I might also remember that I was in my office, that it was a Tuesday, that it was cloudy outside and cold, and we just had a bunch of snow. I might remember the dynamic nature of your introductions and the way that you engaged with me, right? These are all contextual elements of the experience. And in fact, we encode the sound of your voice, the smells in the room, right? The physical feeling of being in this particular chair. All of those things I'm encoding as I have an experience. And each of those elements of the context or environment can actually serve as a cue to remember more about our conversation. So if you were to come back to me 8 weeks later and say, Chris, I want you to think back to the conversation that we had, I would be pulling from the associative nature of the kind of work that you do and the podcasts that you have and the relevant topics that we covered, but also the environment in which I was doing it and the context surrounding it. All of those are cues to memory, and they help us to remember. So now let's get to the question of how do we help people remember, right? Well, one way to help people remember is to engage in questioning that might allow them to self-cue, to self-associate, right? So Michael, you might say, Chris, it was really great talking to you for my podcast. We covered a lot of different topics, including credibility and memory and maybe rapport and trust or things like that. Tell me what you remember. Well, that question allows me now to have some semantic cues that I can begin to search memory with, right? Those topics serve as cues. The other thing that you might say to me is, listen, Chris, when we talked, can you recollect and put yourself back in where you were at the time? What time of day it was, what the environment was like. What do you remember about that? Well, asking me that question, which is not necessarily germane to your ultimate question of what did we talk about, is a gateway into helping me remember what we talked about, right? So if I took a few minutes and I closed my eyes, I can imagine putting myself back into this context. I can recollect the details of the environment around me, of what it felt like it's a bit cold in my office, right? It's cloudy outside. I'll be pulling from those details, and they may seem irrelevant to the topics, but they're intertwined with the experience that I had talking with you. And they're going to facilitate, research shows that they will facilitate the way that I remember, my ability to recall details. The other thing I might think about is timeline. And so there are, getting me into the narrative allows me to start to develop each of the timelines. Now, one point to remember here is that memory is fallible. It's in fact what we call reconstructive. Every time that I remember something, I'm putting the pieces of the puzzle back together. And many times when we start to put the puzzle together, we're missing pieces, right? There are gaps in the puzzle. And it takes some time to fill in those or to find those missing pieces. That's where the context and the associative nature of memory help me to find those pieces and put those pieces back together.
That's a great way to wrap. I can't even talk. That is a great way to wrap that thought process up. Too many W's and A's in that little sentence. I think that's also a great point of consideration, because I'm sure everybody listening to this conversation can think of a situation in their very recent past where they were recalling a lived experience with somebody else who swore it happened different. And nobody was lying, and nobody was deceiving each other, and nobody was manipulating the story, just based on how that memory was coded, reaccessed, contaminated, whatever it might be. They remember it a little bit different. And that doesn't mean that somebody is lying. And this is an important point of differentiation.
100%, completely agree with you. And I think as someone who's seeking to elicit information from others, you have to go into this with a mindset of, I understand the limits of memory. People are going to forget things. I'm going to extend grace, but I'm also going to think about the ways in which I might help them recollect those details, particularly if it's very important details to, a corporate investigation, or, really kind of filling in the holes of somebody's experience in a hiring context.
For sure. In the business development world, people say, don't make it hard for people to give you their money.
Yeah.
Well, in the information seeking world, don't make it hard for people to give you what they know.
Exactly.
How and when you structure the conversation, how you position yourself, your tone of voice, are you asking with curiosity or accusation, how you phrase your questions, all of these things make it easier. And I absolutely love that concept of gateway questions. Yeah. It's an amazing technique. Often I feel like the direct path is the path of most resistance. If I go right for what I want, you start questioning why, you might get defensive. It makes it harder to remember. But if I can ask a few gateway questions, which might seem like a, quote, waste of my time because that's not what I need, I'm making it much easier for you to give me what I need, which saves time in the end.
You got it. And you're promoting accurate recall, right? And which is really what we want to do.
I couldn't agree more. And when I think about promoting accurate recall, I think about not creating unnecessary stress, because unnecessary stress tends to shut down our ability to access information, to participate in the conversation, to analyze alternatives.
You got it.
So I'm going to take a short leap from stress. In your research, what techniques or approaches have you seen that, I guess this is going to be a terrible way to ask a question now that we're asking questions, but I'll make it a choose your own adventure. What techniques have you seen to either avoid creating resistance or to help create cooperation?
Yeah. I think the questions that you ask, the more open-ended they are, the more autonomy you give to the subject and how to respond, you're going to avoid resistance. What I love about this, and I think as I train investigators, they too can get frustrated by, why can't I just ask the question, right? Why can't I just ask the question? And you can always just ask the question, but I think the odds of resistance increase by just going for the question. By allowing people autonomy and asking good open-ended questions that explore their knowledgeability and their willingness to respond and provide you information, I think you're setting yourself up for success. I always say the opening round of an interview is much like a prize boxing match, where my goal is not to deliver necessarily the knockout blow in the first round, but to really try to expose and understand your strategy as my opponent. What is it that you're willing to tell me? And more importantly, what areas are you reluctant to go into? Or maybe not providing as much detail in one as another. If I approach this as a strategy, and I'll just say we should really get into talking about why people resist, but let's agree here for a moment. Resistance is a strategy, just like deception is a strategy, and deception is a form of resistance. And in good interviewing and good elicitation craft is all about exposing someone's strategy and then seeking to meet that strategy. So allowing autonomy, asking good open-ended questions, and assessing what people are willing to talk about and what areas they offer knowledgeability without being pressed, per se, gives you insight into potentially their strategy and the extent of their knowledgeability. And those two things are kind of can conflate with one another. You really have to distinguish those through further strategic questioning.
So many potential follow-up questions to go there. But I love how you talked about resistance being a strategy and this concept of what are they willing to tell you. I want to get back to why people resist. I don't want to let that sit and forget about it, because I'll run my mouth and we'll forget about it. But I love that concept of where are they willing to start? Like where and I know we have to be careful about biases and things with what I'm about to say. As long as we know where a conversation needs to end, where it starts is insignificant. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to say this needs to end in a confession. That is wrong for any number of levels. Sure. But if this conversation needs to end with me getting a clear understanding of what you know in relation to X, cool. Where you start the conversation doesn't matter.
That's right.
So if there's something within several rings of relations that you're willing to talk about, let's just start there. Yeah. And think about it like roads on a map. You pick the first road. Maybe you pick the first 5 roads, but pretty soon you're going to come to an intersection, and now we're going to take a left going to the road we need to be on. So that concept of start where they need to is spectacular.
Can I just say that one of the challenges I often see interviewers face is how to steer the topics of conversation. And I think there's a lot of fear often on an interviewer's part of, well, I need to take control of this. I can't let go of the reins, so to speak, and let somebody else control this interview. Through our training, we really try to offer tactics and strategy to interviewers and get them to realize that they always have control of the interview, right? And there are effective ways to topic steer. I'll just give you one of my favorites, which is to use a summary. Maybe you're droning on about something, Michael, that's really important to you, but it's not important to really the purpose of our conversation today. I'll look for an opportunity to say, if you don't mind, I hate to interrupt, Michael, but I'd love to I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. Let me offer you a summary of what I'm hearing from you, right? Using a summary as a way to kind of break the conversation and pivot, very effective. So I might say, Michael, talking about A and you talked about B, and then you talked a little bit about C, that makes me think about this other topic that I'd like to get to with you. Would you mind if we shift over here? Tell me a little bit more about D. What's your perspective on D, right? Summaries are really effective, not only to show that you're listening to people, right? But to leverage them for topic steering. We always have control of the interview, and how we bridge topics or move from one topic to another it can be done with these kinds of tactics.
I promise I'm going to remember to get back to why people resist, but now we're going to do this. This is as big, if not a bigger problem in the corporate world than in the investigation firm, where people in leadership positions I'm in control, my time frame, what I want, the way I want. That's just not the way the brain and communication works. My bias, and I welcome you to critique it. I truly believe the best way to maintain control over almost any interaction is to let the other person feel like they're in control, because they drop their guard, they're more open, and now we can steer it. So I want to go back to this concept of topic steering. I love the summary one. Absolutely love that. And for all the reasons you said, and from a strategic standpoint, it's almost like a Trojan horse, because you're right. The person's like, oh, you really listen to me. Yes, let's go where you want to go. It's a little bit of a tactic there. You said there were a couple. Could you give us a few more? Because I think this is a really important concept for people.
Yeah. So, some of this research is still being done, and we're kind of exposing these. But another one is called Mockingbird. Mockingbird was developed by Per-Anders Granhag and Timothy Luke and their group over in Sweden. And the idea here is that as I volunteer or introduce a topic, you're likely to follow. So, Michael, if I were to describe my experience, traveling to upstate New York, to Buffalo region, and experiencing those things that are around Buffalo area and Niagara Falls, for example, that's going to lead you to think about either traveling in the same region or other travel that you might have. This is what we would use within a subtle elicitation context. So we would offer this as a way of engaging the mockingbird, engaging the participant to kind of think with us and to associate with us, and likely get them to then kind of naturalistically respond with an example. So if I was really interested, I knew that you took a trip to upstate New York. I knew that involved potentially a meeting with someone. I wanted to expose some of that information. One way to do that would be to offer my own example of that. And this operates on two ways. One is cognitive, right? I bring up a topic, a location, an experience that you might associate with, right? Or associate to your own experiences. It makes you think about this. And if you reflect on like dinner party conversations or party conversations, this is exactly what happens. Somebody offers something, another person says, oh, I've had that same experience, except, right? And then another person says, oh, I can one better this, right? And so everybody's free associating, but they're associating internally to their own experiences and wanting to share. It also has a kind of strategic component to it, right? And so this is the important bit here. How exactly you self-disclose and what topic you self-disclose on, you want to choose very carefully. Self-disclosure has some social benefits, right? When I disclose to you, Michael, you like me more. And be careful, because I like you more. It actually draws us closer. When I self-disclose to you, I increase the likelihood that you would self-disclose to me. So there's a reciprocal nature to this phenomenon. It's a very powerful phenomenon in general, but in the topic steering context, it can really be leveraged strategically to get someone to move into a topic or onto a construct that is similar by naturalistically allowing them to associate. You don't even have to ask them necessarily. You offer the self-disclosure and you allow those natural processes to take on.
Yes. I love it. I'm going to stop adding on because I want to learn from you. Is there another one or two there, or should we jump back to why people resist? Your call.
There's some other work that that same group, Per-Anders and Timothy Luke, are doing on topic bridging. So, it's similar to Mockingbird, except that it is a little freer in association. So if could be temporal in nature. So as I talk about this point in time, it naturally leads to then discussing about this point in time. There's a little bit more work to be done, but I think it's really playing on some of the semantic connections between topics that might be a little bit different than the use of self-disclosure in Mockingbird. I really think that interviewers should be comfortable in approaching topics that might be proximal to others and allowing conversation to flow like a river, right? The more that this can be a natural conversation, things will start to come out. They will be highlighted. And in fact, if I'm trying to do these things with you, Michael, and I'm not getting you to respond, what am I doing? I'm exposing your resistance strategy here. I know that you know about these things. I know that you're now avoiding them as I try to kind of circle in on them with these strategies. Now I really need to think about why it is you're resisting and how I might mitigate that resistance.
So let's go right there. Why do people? Thank you for that. Was like the perfect loop. Very well done. You sound like a guy that's had these conversations before. Let's get right back to resistance. Why do people resist?
Yeah, we've been working on a framework of motivations to resist. What are the motivations, the fundamental human motivations that drive resistance? We kind of know what resistance looks like and sounds like, but we haven't really studied enough of what are the fundamental motivations that drive resistance. And we've kind of come to a model that has three buckets. And I'm going to start with the most obvious bucket, which is what we call instrumental motivations. This has to do with costs and benefits. One of the fundamental reasons that people resist providing information or talking about things is because there's potentially some cost associated with releasing the information or sharing the information. It could be a personal cost. It could be a cost professionally. It could be, any number of things. But fundamentally, it boils down to a cost-benefit analysis. I think everybody kind of understands that. The other two buckets, though, have to do with relationships and how I see myself. So let's start with how I see myself first. One reason that I might not reveal certain information is because it says something negative about me. And it would really, fundamentally, even people that are malevolent and bad actors, even those kinds of individuals want to see themselves in the best possible light, right? They have a persona internally and a standard that they want to be seen by others as. Whenever we take a hit to our self-esteem, to our self-concept, that hurts. And we try to avoid that. So not revealing certain information can occur because of how it makes me feel about myself and what my public image is, right? Relatedly are two constructs that have to do with the self. One has to do with my ability to control what happens. And this is fundamentally what we call autonomy, right? People will resist when their ability to control the situation is taken away, when they feel as though there aren't any moves left to make, right? That's when people will shut down and resist. We actually, in the literature, call it reactance, right? We react in that way to a restriction of our autonomy. The second one has to do with competence, how we feel about our ability to perform in the current situation, right? If we're unsure of how things are unfolding, if we feel like we're lacking information or lacking ability to deal with the moment, we may shut down, right? Again, this notion of the self, of competence, and of autonomy all have to do with how I'm feeling internally about my ability to control, understand, and project the best possible me. So that's the second bucket. You with me still, Michael?
Yes, sir.
The third bucket has to do with relationships. Relationships are fundamental to human engagement with one another. And the lack of relationship is a considerable barrier to providing information or sharing insights, right? If I don't know you, if I don't like you, if I don't trust you, why would I provide you any information that might put me in a vulnerable situation, right? Or share, trade secrets or my knowledgeability with you? Why would I give you an advantage if I didn't have some relationship with you, right? So when we talk about things like rapport and trust, that's what we're talking about. To what extent do we feel connected and trusting of another person? But there's another part to relationships. It may be, Michael, that I like you. It may be that I even trust you. But the relationship is stronger with somebody who's not in the conversation. Because if I reveal information, there may be an impact on others. Maybe they're business associates. Maybe it's my boss. Maybe it's my family or my best friend, right? In negotiation, it's called constituencies, right? We have constituencies outside the room, and a deal, a negotiated deal, it has to consider those constituencies, right? Others are going to be impacted by this. The extent to which that happens, it could influence my strategy and create resistance or reluctance on my part to engage. So just to go over it again, we talked about relationships. We talked about the self and several concepts of the self. And we talked about instrumental costs and benefits. Our model suggests that these account for the motivations that people have to resist, and they're not necessarily independent of one another. You think of them as overlapping Venn diagrams. Any given moment, I may be motivated by a cost-benefit analysis that involves relationships, or a view of the self that involves constituencies outside the room, or a mixture of all three of them.
That's a great recap. I love the deep dive. Well, deep-ish. I know you could go a whole lot deeper based on the time that we have, but I think that also goes back to a comment you made earlier about context.
Yeah.
That in any given situation, it is so easy to judge why somebody is or isn't doing something based on how it relates to our expectations.
That's right.
Or our previous life experience.
That's right.
Without recognizing the context. In the super dirty, fast version of a much longer story, I was in New York, not that far upstate, but I was Albany area a couple of years ago working with a group of executives, and one guy raised his hand and he talked about having a problem with a manager on his team that was struggling to provide some information, and maybe it was honest, maybe it wasn't. And the gentleman who was in charge of this group stood up and said, "Cut me off, excuse me, Michael," then points at this guy and says, "Well, you know how we feel. If he's acting out of integrity and doesn't share our values, then he needs to be out of your organization." And I literally went, time out. Like, maybe he doesn't share your values, but can I give you 47 other reasons why he might have struggled in the next 3 seconds that we can work back from? If we start with he doesn't share values and doesn't have integrity, we rule out all the other options. But if we start with the other options and none of those check out, well, then okay. Maybe at the end he lacks values, but the contextual awareness you just gave is critically important.
So here's the thing. I think you're exactly right to say too often people feel as though they can be mind readers. They understand what the motivation is. They understand what the issue is. They're biased in that way, right? As we train investigators, we train them in a construct called evocation. Have you heard of that construct before, Michael?
I don't know that I have.
Okay, so evocation is derived from motivational interviewing. Yep. Motivational interviewing is a very effective therapeutic intervention in counseling and clinical psychology. And fundamentally, evocation has to do with drawing out people's perspectives, their beliefs, their motivations. And really central to motivational interviewing is this debiasing approach of being non-judgmental and being accepting of what the person has to say, right? So fundamentally what we would train clinicians to do, and now investigators, is to put to the side what you think was the reason, the motivation, either for resistance or for the act in a particular incident, and to seek to draw that out from the person. And to do so in a way that is empathetic, accepting, and non-judgmental, right? So an evocation might be something like this. And this is where we're getting into a construct that we've been working on more recently, on what we refer to as constructive confrontation, right? There are times in which I might not be getting the information that I've been trying to achieve from you. And at some point, I want to be able to call the question, but I want to do so in a way that helps me to understand maybe why you're reluctant to share that information. So Michael, I might say, Michael, it's been a great conversation. You know, we've talked about so many different topics. One topic that's come up a couple of times is X. Whenever we talk about that, I learn a little bit about your perspective, but uh, forgive me, I feel as though you might be holding back. And I'm just curious about if I'm correct, and can you help me understand your thinking as we talk about that topic? What are you feeling? What are your thoughts? Why might you be reluctant to share information with me, right? That's an evocation prompt. I'm inviting you to kind of fill me in on your thinking, to expose me to what the concern is. And I'm going to be accepting and non-judgmental of your response in that context. Now, note the tone and the tenor of the way I offered that, right? It's an invitation. It's an open-ended invitation to tell me about your thoughts, to help me understand what I'm seeing as a bit of resistance potentially, and to give me a bit of insight. What I love about that manner of approaching it is that I hope, Michael, that you would experience that I'm trying to be empathic here. I'm really interested in your thoughts and what concerns you might have in terms of sharing that information. And I'm not trying to prejudge why you're resisting, or even that you're resisting. Maybe it's just that you lack knowledgeability or confidence in that area, and you really can't tell me anymore, right? Maybe it's that you're concealing some information for nefarious reasons. There could be a myriad of reasons, but I need to be open to that. So in this model of constructive confrontation, what we try to do is think about our tone, timing, and technique. And the technique is really evocation. It's drawing out and offering empathy in a non-judgmental space. The timing is very sensitive. I think early on in an engagement, as I said, we want to kind of get people's strategy, and we want to allow them the autonomy to offer resistance. And as an interviewer or an elicitor, you want to be taking notes of where they're willing to talk and where they're not willing to talk. Always understanding, as we've talked about, that you're maintaining control of this interview and that you will circle back to it at the appropriate time. But I think confronting initially, it has the potential of damaging your ability to collect further information. So we're going to allow them to resist. We're going to take note of those areas that we want to come back to and kind of fill in where there's missing pieces in that puzzle. And ultimately, we're going to use a tone which is curious, inquisitive, non-judgmental, supportive, and a technique which offers evocation to try to draw out and understand the motivation. Once I understand the motivation, now I've got tools to address that, right? So let me give you a couple of examples. If you say, Michael, you know what? I just don't know you well enough. I'm not sure that I trust you. Thanks for sharing that with me, Michael. I mean, I'd like to connect with you more and find ways to build trust, right? And there are strategies to build trust, and there are strategies to build rapport. What about if you say, Michael, I just don't understand what's going on, why you're asking these questions? Thanks for sharing that. Let me give you some context to why I'm asking these questions. Let me support your competence, right? And your understanding of the situation. What if it's, I think there may be a big cost to sharing that information. I appreciate you sharing that, Michael. I'd like to learn more about what you think the perceived costs are, because I certainly understand that can really lead to reticence to share information. Can you help me understand what you perceive as the costs in that context, right? So sometimes getting through resistance is just simply eliciting it and acknowledging it. Sometimes it means, as an interviewer, I've got to do more work to support them in different ways or to build a relationship. Another area where you can't do much is if, Michael, you said, you know what, this has big implications for my family. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, Michael. I mean, to the extent that you're willing to share. But I want to just acknowledge that's a reasonable reason for not sharing the information. I can understand that you would be reticent in that context, right? So acknowledging and offering some empathy for their context goes a long way, right? Sometimes we've done some work by the way, on trying to distance people from those outside the room constituencies, or trying to kind of lower the credibility, lessen the credibility of those folks outside the room. And each of those studies, it was fascinating, it backfired on us. It does not work for the interviewer to do that. So with those outside constituencies, it's all about acknowledging and empathizing with the situation, much in the way you might with the costs, right? There's a whole line of research on how to present evidence or information. So Michael, you said something and it contradicts evidence or information that I have. Doing that in a very strategic way, using this kind of constructive approach, the timing, the tone, the technique. Late disclosure or gradual disclosure is better than early disclosure of information. The tone needs to be, collaborative and curious and empathetic, and the technique needs to seek evocation and allow people an open-ended opportunity to resolve it. Michael, you told me X, but I actually have some information that it wasn't X, it was Y. Can you help me reconcile that? Open-ended, seeking evocation, allowing them to respond. I hope this makes sense, but I think this notion of drawing out the motivation, allowing people to resist, drawing out the motivation to understand resistance, and then using the tools that we have within the interview to address that resistance is the way forward. And last thing I'll say on resistance is, when you ask good questions, when you build trust and rapport early, when you facilitate people's elicitation, when you allow resistance and autonomy in those moments, you actually mitigate the likelihood of them shutting down altogether, right? Which again is the goal. The goal is to keep them talking and to keep eliciting to your information objectives.
That was fantastic. From top to bottom, that was all fantastic. At the very end, I love that point about keep them talking. People will kind of make funny faces at me a lot, if I'm being honest. But one particular time is when I say I would rather people lie to me than be silent.
Yeah.
I can't do much with silence, but if
exactly.
they're in the conversation, that means we're alive, we're moving, we have options.
100%.
There are a couple of little things you said in there that I want to make sure people catch. There's a difference between accepting and agreeing. You can accept what somebody says without agreeing with them, without making it right or wrong. And that sometimes is a difficult bridge for people to make, but it is critically important.
Yeah, and let's give an example of this. Let's say that somebody's offering an account of something that really contradicts what we know from other sources or information, right? Video, other witnesses, maybe even evidence on hand. We can accept their narrative in that moment, right? And patiently understand that we're going to have opportunities to constructively confront them. And so it's acceptance is a way of showing someone that you are willing to listen to them in that moment. And you're not going to push back in that moment because you have objectives to collect more information. But there will be a time, right, in which to softly challenge their account.
Yes. And that time, to get back to something you said earlier, is when it's strategically valuable for us, not when the emotion spikes in the immediate moment that we hear.
100%. One of the challenges, and I think we need more research on this, but we recognize it, is that bad practice happens when interviewers fail to control their own emotions. Right? We talk about emotion regulation, the ability to control one's own emotions. I think too often we see bad questioning, accusatorial practices, jumping the gun, confronting in ways that are not productive because of the interviewer's own internal state being out of regulation, right? Not controlled in that moment. So one of the things that we really need to do more work on in terms of the research is understanding how to enable interviewers to better self-regulate.
I'd love to offer a quick thought on that, but I want to point out two more things, actually, before I forget. if in case people didn't pick up on this, in those examples that you gave when you were talking about the evocation techniques, you started every single one by saying, thank you for sharing, or I appreciate you sharing.
Yes.
Say thank you. I say it ad nauseum. It is a great way to show that you listen, that they have autonomy, control, you respect them, you're not challenging them. When in doubt, just say thank you. Like, so
100%.
that's a tremendous technique there that I want to make sure didn't slide by people, because that was actually very, very, very important. And I want to thank you, because one of my biases is I really don't like the question, help me understand. Not because it's a bad question, but because it can come across as terribly parental in a moment in time where
I think that's a fair assessment.
Wanted to. And you just said, help me reconcile. And I love that. I think that's an elevated version of help me understand. I'm going to give you credit for it for as long as I can remember, and then I might end up stealing it from you. I'm just going to warn you up front. I apologize. But I absolutely love that. I think that that's an elevated question. On the emotions piece, my bias, my experience. So I welcome you to critique it. You're never going to embarrass or upset me, I promise. And this comes from interviewing. Early on in my interviewing career, I was lucky enough to watch interviewers that really struggled to control their emotions. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting there thinking, how does that help? Now, in fairness to them, I hadn't really been in the chair yet. So I'm now being judgmental. But when I found myself having to elicit truthful information from people who were especially resistant, or sometimes unexpectedly resistant, like you really didn't see this coming. Like, how did I end up here? Where did this go off the rails? But more so when it was investigating crimes against other people. I have had a very close relationship with my mom my whole life. Make fun of me if you want, but crimes against women and those kinds of things. And for me, what I found, and again, I would love for you to critique this because I say it all the time. So if I need to stop, I want to know. But I feel like anytime early on in my career, and to this day, thankfully it happens less, where I say something that I immediately wish I could have back, it's because at that moment in time, satisfying my emotions was more important than achieving the outcome.
Yeah.
So for me, if I have to interview somebody because they abused a young woman, well, regardless of how I wish I was out in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa in a rundown bar and enough water to maybe keep them alive for a few days, that's not the world we live in. So my job isn't to get him to tell me the truth. My job is to do everything I can to ensure that to whatever degree there is justice for this woman, she gets it. But also this guy gets whatever the maximum legal punishment is. So to do that, I have to stay contained. I have to keep my emotions at bay, and I have to focus strategically on the next tactic, step at hand throughout the conversation. So it might be a long-winded way to get back to, if I can value the outcome of the conversation enough, I can keep my emotions in check. But if that outcome gets unbalanced, then my emotions take over.
That's right. I think keeping the goal in mind is really important, and taking a moment when you need to, right? We talk about this often when we, are upset by something and we fire off an email, right? But no, what the recommendation is, write the email. Don't send it. Wait. Come back to it. Right. And I think time has the opportunity for the blood pressure to settle, for the emotion to be subdued, and for perspective and rewriting towards those goals that you said to happen. Right. So what I would say to interviewers is, if you feel yourself in that moment not being able to hold back, take a break. Take a break for you and for the betterment of the interview. Come back in 10 minutes. Gain perspective, go back and just think about your strategy and come back in fresh and renewed, right? Recognize when it's starting to boil up and exercise control by getting yourself out of the situation. There's a wonderful emotion regulation literature that's used in the clinical, but also in the social and cognitive psychological fields. And part of the stages of emotion regulation have to do with kind of recognizing the emotion when it's happening and understanding the context that drives the emotion, right? And then developing strategies around how you regulate that. Sometimes the best way to emotion regulate is to take yourself out of the situation, or in some cases, avoid the situation. So I would say if there are particular types of cases that you have a difficult time with controlling, interviewing pedophiles, as the father of a daughter, and anybody who would do that to my child, I would react emotionally to, right? And the thought of anybody doing that to a child, I would react emotionally to. Maybe those aren't the cases for me. If I understand that I have a strong reaction, know thyself in that moment and develop strategies around dealing with the emotion.
I love how you said gain perspective. Separate the fuel from the fire. Give
Yeah,
yourself a little bit of
great
space
analogy. Yeah,
and gain perspective. And when I think separate the fuel from the fire, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It doesn't matter where the blame lies.
yeah,
If the fire doesn't get any fuel, then it extinguishes itself. So
you got it.
just
You got it.
separate the two.
It's a great analogy.
I promised I would let you go right about now, and I have 100 more questions that I want to ask you. If you have 30 seconds, you mentioned
Sure.
strategies for building trust and rapport, and some people
Yeah.
might have caught that and hung on to it. So
Yeah,
if you'll come on another time, I'd love to continue.
we'll
diving
unpack it
into-
later on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but for right now, can you just give us like one or two super quick highlights for building trust and rapport?
Yeah, let's first define them very quickly. Rapport is not trust. Too often we've conflated them in the literature and we talk about them interchangeably, but they're very different. Let's start with rapport. Rapport is about relationship building. It's about building connection, and it's about building liking towards one another, right? Comfort, if you will. And there are what we call relational strategies, and there are conversational strategies. Relational strategies have to do with sharing information about one another, using self-disclosure, identifying common ground, and using what's called affirmation. Now, you offered that compliment of saying thank you. Thank you is not necessarily affirmation, but it's showing appreciation for someone. Affirmation is recognizing who someone is, who they see themselves as, and highlighting that. So if you were to tell me a story, Michael, about your relationship with your father and how meaningful that was and how proud of your father you are, I might say to you, well, it sounds like you had a fantastic relationship with your father, and you're just very close and respectful of them and so proud of them. That must have been a wonderful time of your life to reflect back on, right? That's an affirmation. I'm taking what you've offered me and I'm kind of showing you the mirror, saying, this is what I'm seeing about you, right? And you were a good son. I mean, you took care of your father, right? Showing you the mirror. It turns out when we affirm people's self-concept, the good in them, they're more likely to tell us about the bad. Affirm the good, find those opportunities, people are more likely to reveal some of the bad. So that's rapport in the relational sense. The conversational sense is really, the heart of some of your podcast here. It's active listening. It's empathic listening, right? It's the flow and the dynamics of the conversation. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's not the relational part of it, but it's really the way that I'm showing you that I'm willing to listen to you. And I'm willing to accept what you've offered me, right? In that context. Let's talk about trust. Trust is about predicting the future. It's about, knowing that, having more confidence that something will happen with someone in the future. So, and it's situational. Michael, I might trust you to do fantastic interviews with people, but I might not trust you to fix my car. I don't know about your ability to fix a car, right? It's contextually driven, right? There are people that you trust in certain contexts, but not in other contexts. So trust is situational. It's also an individual difference. Some people are more trusting than others in general, right? It's just in general, some people are quicker to trust others, and some people aren't. But we've really focused in on what's called cognitive trust. Cognitive trust has to do with constructs of this kind of rational approach that people can be trusted and will do what they've promised to do, right? Can and will. And professional trust, cognitive trust comes through in professionalism. It comes through in transparency and honesty, right? It comes through with fairness of a process, and it comes through with moral character. So in terms of procedural justice, we talk about procedural justice. I'm offering you a fair process to resolve whatever it is this conversation is about, right? I'm going to give you voice. I'm going to not prejudge. I'm going to listen to you. There's a connection with rapport, but it's not the same. It's the nature of the process. It's a fair process where you will not be manipulated, right? Moral character says more about the interviewer or the individual, right? I'm truthful. I have a character that is trustworthy. I wouldn't do anything to you negatively, right? Or seek to manipulate you. It's not separate the process from the person. Both are important, right? Both are important. When you see someone who's of high moral character, we're more trusting of them, right? We don't believe that we'll be treated poorly in that context. And then finally, competence, professionalism, right? People that are smooth in their communication style, who understand how to manage these interviews, who offer a sense of professionalism, are more likely to be trusted. The example I love to give is the doctor. So who do you trust more? Well, it could depend on what your preferences are. Do you want a doctor who has a great bedside manner, who makes you feel good, who spends time getting to know you, who you feel like you've built a relationship with over time? That's really more rapport, right? Or do you want a doctor who may not have the best bedside manner, but is an amazing diagnostician, who keeps up on the latest therapeutics and approaches to wellness and health or treatment, whose diagnosis and treatment plan for you can be trusted in the future? In other words, when they give this to me, I know it is going to take care of my issue, right? Because they have the competence and the ability to do that. Which do you trust? Well, it depends on the person, right? Some are going to want the bedside manner. And that's really more the rapport side of it. Some are going to want the competence and professionalism, and to be able to trust the doctor's diagnostic utility. That's the way to really think about the distinction between rapport and trust. Both are important.
That's a great analogy. Thank you for taking the extra 3 minutes to work it in. I really appreciate it. If I don't let you go now, we're going to be ordering dessert. So I need to make sure that I don't completely jack up the rest of your day. This was a fantastic conversation. I took 2 pages of notes. I can't thank you enough for everything that you shared. I guarantee this is one that people are going to be rewinding and listening to again. For the people who have been taking notes alongside me and want to learn more, where do they need to go to follow you, to connect with you, to learn more from you?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think, going to our website at the Applied Cognition Lab is probably the best way. And Michael, we can share that maybe in the notes.
Yes, for sure.
So that they can access that. But, all of our research is there. And I'm, of course, always happy to answer questions. And I love engaging with others on research questions, but also training questions and just sharing the science. So thanks so much for having me, Michael.
No, thank you. This was a tremendous conversation. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much. If it's okay with you, we're going to have a part 2 at some point in the not too distant future.
I'd love it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Stay safe, stay warm out there. We'll talk to you soon.
We'll try. Take care.
Christian, thank you for an amazing conversation. Every thought you shared was jam-packed with golden nuggets that we can all apply in our high-impact conversations. I appreciate everything you shared, the clarity you shared, the detail you shared. Thank you so much. I could recap the entire conversation, but I do love how you talked about the concept of topic steering. Let the other person have control. Let them start the conversation. We'll steer it the way we need it to go. Super important for everybody to realize how to put that into action. I also loved how you talked about how we can test the limits limits of people's knowledge. It's not about catching them lying. If we can test the limits of their knowledge, we can greater wrap our arms around, or more accurately, wrap our arms around the context of the situation, and then begin to accurately focus on their credibility and knowledgeability. Love it. And of course, the concept of recognizing that people generally have more motivation to resist than to commit to sharing information openly in our conversations. You pack so much value into 1 hour. I can't thank you enough, Christian. Thank you so very much. And of course, thank you to all of you that joined us for another episode this week. Hopefully this is one you go back and rewind several times as you take all the notes from here that hopefully you can apply in all of your high impact conversations as well. While you're online today, please, once again, we would be grateful if you took just a second to like the show, subscribe to it, share it with your network, and absolutely leave us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. And please don't forget to take a quick moment to check out our sponsors. You can head over to humantel.com and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class online training of your choice to develop the skill set necessary to recognize when people's emotions are changing by identifying shifts in people's facial expressions and nonverbal communications. It's over at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered and learn everything you need to know about joining the International Association of Interviewers and earning your certified forensic interviewer designation. Again, over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And we appreciate you taking just a quick moment to head over to inquasive.com to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more to teach them how to uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. Thank you for being here for another week. We truly appreciate it. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.